Emma and Ryan had the kind of life that looked perfect from the outside. Smiles in every photo, a cozy home in a quiet neighborhood, and a love story everyone envied. But behind their closed bedroom door, a nightmare was unfolding. One that would end with Emma fighting for her life on a hospital bed and Ryan vanishing without a trace. What happened over the course of 2 chilling hours would unravel a twisted plan months in the making, and reveal a darkness no one saw coming. Emma and Ryan were the kind of couple people envied. They met at a charity run 5 years earlier, bonded over coffee and shared playlists, and never looked back. To anyone watching, they seemed inseparable, always smiling in pictures, attending local events, hosting game nights at their house. Emma, a third-grade teacher, was the heart of her school, always volunteering for extra duties and remembered every student's birthday. Ryan, a real estate agent, had charm and confidence that made it easy for him to close deals and win people over. Together, they looked like the blueprint of a happy young American couple. They lived in a neat 2-story home tucked into a peaceful suburb of Springfield, Illinois. Their neighbors would often wave to them during morning walks, and on weekends, Emma could be seen tending to her garden while Ryan washed his car or brought her lemonade. The house itself looked like something from a magazine. Warm light pouring through clean windows, a porch swing out front, wind chimes tinkling softly in the breeze. Nothing ever seemed out of place. But the signs were there. Little things at first. Emma stopped joining her co-workers for happy hour. She missed more family gatherings. Her once colorful wardrobe slowly faded into dull tones. She smiled less in photos. Still, no one thought too much of it. She always had an excuse: grading papers, feeling under the weather, or needing to be home for Ryan's late dinners. Behind closed doors, things were different. There were whispers among neighbors who'd occasionally heard raised voices through open windows. One of them once saw Emma walking her dog with a bruise on her forearm. Another noticed she always flinched when loud noises came from nearby construction. But when asked, Emma would laugh it off, brushing it away with a soft tone and downcast eyes. She had become an expert at deflection. Her co-workers grew concerned when she started showing up late or tired. She'd forget lesson materials she used to prepare days in advance. She rarely took part in staff meetings unless directly called upon. She once left halfway through a school assembly, saying she had a family emergency. When her best friend at work pressed her, Emma simply said she was stressed and needed a break. That was the end of the conversation. At home, Ryan had grown more controlling. He monitored Emma's phone, criticized her clothes, and questioned every minute she spent outside the house. He insisted it was for her safety. He said he loved her too much to lose her. Emma, isolated from friends and family, began to believe him. The emotional manipulation was quiet and slow, a steady erosion of confidence. She didn't notice how much of herself she had lost until it was too late. On the outside, they were still the perfect couple. They hosted a barbecue just 2 weeks before everything fell apart. Emma smiled, served drinks, and laughed with guests. Ryan grilled steaks and handed out business cards between bites. No one suspected a thing. Then came the Thursday no one saw coming. Emma didn't show up to work that morning. At first, no one panicked. Teachers get sick, things happen. But after several missed calls and no response to texts, concern turned into fear. Her car was in the driveway. Her porch light was still on, though the sun had been up for hours. Her colleague Megan decided to drive to the house during lunch. She knocked on the door. No answer. She walked around the back, called Emma's name, and finally peeked through a window. That was when she saw something that didn't make sense. A broken picture frame, a chair tipped over, and a shape lying motionless near the bed. By the time police arrived, the quiet street had become a crime scene. Nothing would ever be the same again. The paramedics arrived just in time. Emma was barely breathing when they found her on the bedroom floor. Her body was curled in on itself, as if trying to protect her from something that had already happened. Her face was bruised and swollen, with one eye completely shut. Dried blood was on her lower lip, and her arms bore fresh, finger-shaped bruises. There were scratches along her back, and her right shoulder looked dislocated. Her pulse was weak. Her clothes were torn. The room was cold and eerily silent, apart from the steady beeping of the equipment the EMTs brought in. It was later confirmed by doctors that she had been lying there unconscious for almost 2 hours before anyone called for help. 2 hours where she could have died. 2 hours of bleeding internally. 2 hours of brain trauma worsening. Whoever did this to her hadn't called for help. Whoever did this had left her there. At the hospital, a trauma team worked urgently to stabilize her. She was intubated, placed on oxygen, and rushed into emergency surgery for internal bleeding near her liver and kidneys. Her right arm was fractured. 3 ribs were broken. She had bruising along her neck that suggested she had been strangled. She also had a severe concussion. Doctors said it was a miracle she was still alive, but whether she would ever speak again, or even wake up, was still uncertain. Meanwhile, detectives were sent to the house to begin their investigation. The home was quiet, undisturbed. There were no signs of a break-in, no smashed windows, no footprints or forced entry. The front and back doors were locked. The house alarm had been turned off manually at 4:13 a.m. Someone inside had done it. The bedroom was where most of the scene played out. Blood on the carpet, a cracked phone screen near the nightstand, a single slipper under the bed. The dresser was open, some drawers pulled halfway out like someone had been rummaging through them. But nothing of obvious value appeared to be missing. Emma's wallet was still in her purse. Her keys were on the hallway table. But Ryan was gone. His car wasn't in the driveway. None of his phones were active. His office hadn't heard from him that day. He hadn't shown up for an appointment with a client. There was no note, no message, no calls to Emma's family or friends. It was as if he had simply vanished. The timeline grew even more unsettling when neighbors shared their home security footage. Around 6:14 a.m., Ryan's silver SUV was seen pulling out of the driveway. He hadn't returned. Police put out a bolo, "Be on the lookout," for Ryan's vehicle. They began tracking his credit card activity, checking phone records and questioning friends and coworkers. No one had heard from him. Everyone said the same thing. He always seemed so normal, so in love with Emma. No one believed he could hurt her. But the evidence was building. In the meantime, detectives continued their search of the house. In the laundry room, they found damp towels stained with blood. In the bathroom trash, a broken necklace that Emma's sister said she always wore. There was also a small trail of dried blood near the staircase, possibly where Emma had tried to crawl before losing consciousness. As Emma lay unconscious in the hospital, surrounded by machines, a question loomed over everyone involved. What exactly happened during those 2 hours? Why didn't he call for help? What had triggered the violence? Answers were scarce, and time was running out. If Ryan had planned this, if it wasn't just a moment of rage, he could be anywhere. With Emma unable to speak, the only clues lay in what he left behind, and the silence he left her in. Detectives returned to the house 2 days later with a new warrant in hand. Emma was still unconscious in the ICU, and Ryan had yet to be found. The urgency of the investigation was mounting. Something about the crime scene didn't sit right. There was too little chaos for such a brutal assault. The house wasn't trashed. There were no shattered mirrors, no overturned furniture in the living room. Aside from the bedroom, everything else appeared untouched. It didn't feel like an impulsive outburst. It felt planned. They started their second sweep of the house with fresh eyes. Every drawer, closet, and cabinet was opened. The guest room closet contained nothing but spare blankets and boxes of decorations. The kitchen pantry was fully stocked. In the garage, Ryan's tools were neatly lined up on a pegboard. It was as if he had left the house expecting to return. Then they reached the master bedroom again, the scene of the attack. One officer noticed something behind a row of winter coats in the closet. A small metal safe, barely the size of a shoebox, was bolted to the back wall and partially covered with a blanket. Inside the safe were photos, dozens of them. Every single photo was of Emma. Some looked like they had been taken while she was sleeping. Others were clearly taken without her knowledge through windows or doorways. Some were disturbing. Images of Emma with bruises on her body. Marks that no one had ever seen or reported. Alongside the photos was a black leather notebook. It was filled with pages of cramped handwriting. There were no dates, no names, just lists. Lists of Emma's daily habits, what time she woke up, what she ate, when she called her sister, how long she spent at the grocery store. There were comments about what she wore and whether he approved. At first glance, it might have looked like obsessive journaling, but as the detectives read further, the tone darkened. There were phrases like, "Too much time outside today," "Ignored my instructions," and "Needs correction." One page had a heading that simply read, "Punishment, short list." Below it were cryptic lines like "Remove phone or lock door and 2-hour silence test." That last one struck a nerve. At the very bottom of the notebook was a single chilling entry. "She needs to learn this time. I'll make sure she does." There was no date, but the ink was fresh. The page wasn't smudged. It had likely been written just before the attack. With this discovery, the nature of the case shifted. This wasn't a domestic dispute that escalated in the heat of the moment. It was something far more calculated. Ryan hadn't just hurt Emma. He had planned to do it, and he had recorded it all in cold detail. Forensic teams bagged the photos, the notebook, and other evidence from the safe. They also examined Emma's computer, where they found installed tracking software. Her phone, though damaged, showed traces of spyware that allowed her calls and messages to be monitored. It became clear Ryan had been controlling every aspect of her life for months, maybe longer. The neighbors were re-interviewed. One recalled seeing Emma sitting alone on the porch a few nights before the incident, staring into the distance for nearly an hour. Another remembered hearing faint crying from the backyard late at night, but didn't report it because the sounds quickly stopped. Now those small moments took on a sinister meaning. The safe in the closet told the truth Emma hadn't been able to say. She had been watched, followed, and manipulated in her own home. And Ryan had planned his final act like it was the ending of a story only he believed he could write. But he hadn't expected her to survive. 3 days after the attack, a park ranger reported an abandoned vehicle parked just outside a hiking trail near Decatur, Illinois, about 90 miles from Springfield. It matched the description of Ryan's silver SUV. When police arrived, they found it locked and empty, parked carefully beneath a tree to avoid direct sunlight. The gas tank was nearly full. There were no visible signs of damage or struggle. But inside, they found items that offered new leads. A fast food receipt from that morning, a disposable coffee cup with a smear of lipstick that didn't match Emma's shade, and a folded paper map with several storage facilities circled in red ink. They ran the receipt and traced it back to a gas station just off Route 51. The clerk there remembered Ryan. He bought a large coffee, protein bars, and prepaid phone cards. He paid in cash, wore a baseball cap low over his face, and avoided conversation. Security footage confirmed it was him. The timestamp was 7:42 a.m., only about an hour after Emma was rushed to the hospital. The map led investigators to a 24-hour storage facility just outside the city. It was a quiet place on the edge of town, the kind of place used by people moving, downsizing, or hiding. The facility manager said Unit 42 had been rented under a fake name, but the address and payment details matched Ryan's billing history. The unit had been rented a month earlier. No one had questioned it at the time. Police approached the unit cautiously. The metal door was locked from the inside, which was unusual. They knocked. No response. After several warnings, they pried it open. Inside, Ryan was asleep on a thin camping mattress. Around him were survival supplies, water bottles, canned food, flashlights, changes of clothes, a first aid kit. There was also a laptop, a burner phone, and another small safe, which was later found to contain over $4,000 in cash, multiple fake IDs, and a list of international border crossings. He didn't resist when officers arrested him. In fact, he barely reacted at all. He didn't ask about Emma, didn't speak a word, just stared ahead as if none of it mattered. He was taken into custody and held without bail. The storage unit gave investigators even more disturbing insight into Ryan's state of mind. On the laptop, they found documents outlining travel plans under a different identity. There were browser searches for faking a death, countries with no extradition, and how to disappear completely. He had planned his escape long before the attack. This wasn't desperation. It was a blueprint. But perhaps the most unsettling detail was the second notebook found among his belongings. Unlike the one from Emma's closet, this one read more like a journal. It spoke of control, dominance, and punishment. One entry said, "They'll never understand. She was mine to fix." Another read, "If she won't listen, she doesn't get to leave. She chose this." The level of calculation was staggering. Ryan had built an alternate version of reality where he was the victim, where Emma's independence was betrayal, and where his violence was justified. Back in Springfield, news of Ryan's capture spread quickly. Neighbors who had once admired the couple now spoke in hushed tones, shocked by how wrong their assumptions had been. Emma's co-workers, family, and friends waited anxiously for updates on her condition, holding on to hope that she would wake up and one day be able to tell her side of the story. For now, it was up to the evidence to speak for her. And what it revealed was terrifying. Ryan had been prepared for everything, except the possibility that Emma might survive. Emma woke up 9 days after the attack. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused, as machines around her beeped in steady rhythm. She couldn't speak right away. Tubes and wires kept her still, and her right arm remained in a sling. Nurses were cautious with her, speaking in soft tones, monitoring her every movement. Her family stood nearby, tears quietly falling as she blinked at the ceiling. The doctors called it a miracle. But recovery was slow and uncertain. Emma struggled with memory gaps. She could recall parts of the evening before the attack, preparing dinner, folding laundry, checking lesson plans. But the morning after was a blank. When gently asked about Ryan, her expression changed. Her body tensed. She couldn't describe what had happened in the bedroom. And she didn't remember calling for help, because she never did. For weeks she remained in the hospital, healing physically while the investigation continued around her. Detectives visited often, careful not to overwhelm her. She was shown images of the items found in the safe. Her hands shook. She recognized the photos. Some she remembered being taken, but many she had never seen before. Her breathing grew uneven when she was told Ryan had been watching her, tracking her movements, writing about her every action in secret journals. What Emma couldn't say, the evidence confirmed. Medical reports detailed injuries consistent with extended physical restraint, strangulation, and blunt force trauma. The journals outlined premeditation, the storage unit, the burner phone, the fake IDs. All of it pointed to a man who had planned to break her, disappear, and never be found. Ryan was officially charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, unlawful imprisonment, and stalking. He entered a plea of not guilty. In court, he showed little emotion. He sat still during the testimonies, occasionally glancing at the courtroom walls but never toward Emma, who watched the proceedings from a separate room on video. too fragile to sit in the same space as him. The trial lasted 4 weeks. Prosecutors laid out the timeline clearly. Ryan had spent months controlling Emma's life, documenting her behavior, and planning how he would punish her when she didn't meet his standards. He waited until the early morning, attacked her in a calculated burst of violence, then fled while she lay bleeding and unconscious. They argued that his failure to call for help was not just neglect, it was part of the plan. His defense claimed the injuries were the result of a domestic argument gone wrong, insisting there was no intention to kill. They said Ryan panicked and left because he was scared. But the jury didn't buy it. The photos, the notebooks, the spyware, the escape plan. None of it fit the story of a man who lost control in a moment. It painted the picture of someone who had been in control all along. On the 21st day, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Ryan was sentenced to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole. After the trial, Emma gave one public statement. Her voice was soft but steady. She said she didn't remember everything, but she remembered enough to know she had survived something no one should ever have to. She thanked the nurses, the detectives, her family, and every person who didn't look the other way. Then she quietly stepped back out of the spotlight. Emma never returned to her old life. She moved out of Illinois, changed her name, and began working with a nonprofit that helps women escape abusive relationships. She rarely speaks of her past, but those who know her say she's rebuilding slowly, piece by piece, with the strength of someone who walked through the darkest moment of her life and lived to tell the world without saying a word. The perfect couple had been a lie. But Emma's survival was the truth that couldn't be silenced.